This episode was brought to you by Alpha House of Fashion, specialists in African and English wear, wedding gowns, corporate wear, embroidery designs and logos. Baseline Media Intellects, bringing your vision to life with lighting, sound and rigging, all to a professional degree. And Batched by Zahra, generous servings of authentic Pakistani burfis, brownies and bakes at an unbeatable price. Enjoy.
Bismillah wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers, dear listeners. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Scholar and the Student podcast. I am back to my old habit, which I had in season 1 and 2, which was going to Mufti Abu Layth and poaching his guests. So I found this esteemed brother from Birmingham, UK, if I'm not mistaken, from Mufti Abu Layth's podcast back when we were all in lockdown. I followed him then, and he doesn't know this yet, but he's actually the reason why I started taking the school of Medina, the Maliki Madhab, seriously, because he's the one who opened the avenue for me contacting Sidi Iqbal and being in that cohort of studying Murshid al-Mu'in. So please welcome all the way our first medical doctor. We've had doctors on the show before. Our first medical doctor from Birmingham, UK, Dr. Majid Shaikh. It's not my dad. You guys know my dad's a doctor. It's not him. Dr. Majid Shaikh. Al-Maliki. Assalamu alaikum, doc. How are you doing?
Wa alaikum salam. Mas, nice to that's one hell of an introduction. Do you know what I mean? I'm getting a bit of imposter syndrome now.
Oh my god. Yeah, but you have to tell the truth, doc. And you are the one who, you know, that Maliki Madhab group that we've got on Facebook. You're the one
Yeah,
you're the one who posted that Sidi Iqbal is teaching online, Murshid al-Mu'in, please contact me, which I did. And then you got me in contact with Sidi Iqbal. I've got his WhatsApp details still on my phone. So yeah, it's amazing how Allah really connects us at the end of the day. But anyways, doc, would you like to tell us about how you maybe became a doctor and how did you find the Maliki Madhab of all things? Because unlike me, the lazy bones, Dr. Majid, he actually used to teach the Maliki Madhab in Urdu. You might actually find a couple of recordings on YouTube and the like if you look hard enough. So how did that happen, doc? How do you balance this whole thing of being the atypical anaesthetist, which I should have said at the beginning, he's got a podcast by that name, and also being someone who not only learns but teaches the Maliki Madhab?
Okay, so there was a number of questions in there. So let me start off with the obvious one about being a doctor. I come from a medical family. My father was a doctor. There was a lot of the culture was very medical, you know, cousins, sisters, etc., etc. You know, a lot of people going, you know, it's like the family profession, really. So that's how I got into medicine. And then I spent a bit of time trying to figure out what field to go into. And I think this is actually one of the advantages of medicine as a career, in that there is lots of different avenues. There's lots of different things you can do. I mean, there's actually I was actually speaking to one of the juniors the other day. There's this like joke little flow chart that you can find on the internet of like, you know, are you sane? Are you not sane? And, you know, it keeps going down. Do you like people? Do you not like people? Do you prefer your patients asleep? Do you prefer your patients dead? Do you prefer your patients small? Etc. like that. So what that means is that, you know, there's a wide variety of personality types. Because I really do think that, you know, you end up in certain fields, whatever it might be, you know, a lot of it is, you know, there's this two-way thing of, you know, your personality affects what you do, and then what you do affects your personality. And so after, you know, kind of, you know, becoming a family physician is probably something everybody thought I would do. But then once I did get into medicine and started working into different aspects and different specialties, I found that anesthesia and perioperative medicine, so the specialty of basically getting you through an operation while the surgeon is trying to kill you or trying to fix you, is what appealed to me. And I was actually looking at this the other day. I've been an anaesthetist now for 18 years in total. First as a junior, and alhamdulillah, I'm a consultant now, so the equivalent of an attending in America. 8 years now, mashallah. So and, you know, alhamdulillah, it's, you know, it's I've always thought that Allah got me this career by I mean, obviously everything's by the will of Allah, but I mean, I fell into it, but kind of by accident. I was thinking of doing emergency medicine, casualty, and as part of that training, you do need to do some anesthesia. And I got a job doing anesthesia, and then I kind of realized this is much better. Why do I want to work on the front line all the time? And so that's how I ended up in anesthesia. That's actually a relatively simple story. The story of the Maliki Madhab is a little bit more complex. I have actually talked about it on one of my podcast episodes, actually. And I would say I was always interested in religion as a teenager, a young man, teenager. My family were religious. I would say they were religious with a small r in the beginning. It was a case of, it wasn't any kind of big hoo-ha. It was, we prayed, we fasted, we ate halal, we did the right things, you know. My dad had a little bit of I think the best word, it sounds pejorative, but I don't mean it in a pejorative way. A bit of a modernist take on things. He was very interested in the poetry of Iqbal. He'd read lots of Urdu newspapers and things like this, and so he would have and maybe I think maybe during his life he'd come across some people who were outwardly religious, but they didn't have the character of a religious person, so I'll put it that way. The lying, the cheating, or whatever. So and then that was a time, 80s, 90s in the UK. We're first generation immigrants. I mean, I was born there, but I grew up in the UK, and there's lots of discussions and ideas about identity. I mean, I lived in an area which was predominantly white. I was one of the few brown people in my school. I was in a school of about 1,000 people, there was probably 3-4 Muslims, in total. And so, there was no masjid. Halal food was we had to go to the next town. And so there was a little bit of, it did kind of spark a curiosity in me, as I said, when I was a teenager. And I'd get books and, read different aspects and things like that. I then went to university. And when I got to university, it was like a complete culture change. I was now in Birmingham, second city of the UK, very multicultural. Every type of flavor of Muslim you've ever met, whether they're Indo-Pak, African, Arab, whether they're Sunni, Shia, the different groups amongst Ahlus Sunnah, Salafis, etc., etc. And it was a little bit bewildering, but it was also quite exciting because it was I was finally getting to see the practicalities, I suppose. And I found myself gravitating towards the Salafis at the time. I had a couple of friends who were Salafis. One of my roommates was. And I found at the time it was... So there's this concept in medicine of evidence-based medicine, the idea that whatever you do, there is a reason behind it. And there's trials and this, that, and the other. And the Salafi way seemed like it was evidence-based. Again, we're talking about the late 90s. English dawah was, a lot of it was Salafi or Salafi inclined. A lot of money being pumped from Saudi Arabia. You're getting the institutes, you're getting all these translations of Kitab al-Tawheed, Sifat al-Salat al-Nabi, all these kinds of, the books of Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, Sheikh al-Bani, Uthaymeen, Bin Baz, whatever. And it seemed evidence-based because there seemed to be a lot of cultural cruft, especially if you come from an Indo-Pak background. There's a lot of, where does the culture stop and the religion begin, or the religion begin and the culture, that kind of thing. And this was refreshing because it was simple. It was evidence-based in the sense of, why do we believe this? Well, there's this hadith. Why do you believe that? Well, there's this ayah, you know. And so, and in some ways, although I have some resentments around that period of time, I can say that it at least stopped me from getting into the usual kind of problems that people get into at university, whether it be drink, drugs, women, whatever it might be,
Yeah, the blood, sex, and booze, basically.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And so, at least maybe that was Allah's way of keeping me safe from that. I was with these very very austere, very kind of puritanical, very, you walk around in a thobe or a jalabia, you don't talk to women, you don't watch television, you don't do this, you don't do that. And yeah, so maybe that was Allah's way of keeping me safe from other things. And yeah, it was very, as I said, from a conceptual point, it was very appealing. As I said, it's evidence-based. You know why you're doing what you're doing. Also, there's, I suppose, the problems of being brash in youth. You think you know everything. You think you know everything in the world. I'd have big, long arguments with my mother about why following the Hanafi Madhab was haram and all this kind of stuff. And, it was all very stupid. When you look back on it, youth is wasted on the young, as they say, right? There is such a thing as stupid young men. And in one sense, I suppose I was that. Unfortunately, because, as I found out later, there isn't a huge amount of depth to a lot of the Salafi way. And so once you get past the initial kind of things, you then find that it becomes splintered very quickly. And you start, for something which is supposed to be simple and the straight way and the one way, the saved sect, all these kinds of things, they did not split. It was, one mosque wouldn't go to another mosque. There'd be people doing all sorts of stupid things. They'd come to Taraweeh, but then they wouldn't pray the Taraweeh because they didn't want to. And then they'd come for the Jummah, but they'd come late because they don't want to listen to the khutbah of someone who's al-Bidah. This is within what people now would call Salafis or Wahhabis or whatever. I'm not even talking about, going to a Hanafi masjid or something like that, And, I started thinking that, there's something wrong here. There's just something wrong, right? And at first I thought to myself that it was probably Shaitan. It was probably Shaitan telling me, because he was giving me doubts because, this was the true way. I was getting doubts from him. Anyway, life happened. Unfortunately, my father passed away, got married, and I ended up in a situation that for my job, I had to move away. Within about 5 days' notice, I basically had a job which was 200 miles north, and so I had to relocate very quickly. Because at the end of the day, you have to earn money, right? And where I went was, in a sense, kind of similar to where I'd grown up, in that it was a mainly white town. There was some Muslims. There was a masjid, at least. And you could get some halal food, but it was very, it was a much different thing. And actually, again, I think this is one of the blessings that Allah gave me, because He gave me a bit of time out of that. Sometimes when you're in a situation, you can't see the wood for the trees, and when you're out of the situation, you can have a more three-dimensional look, and you can kind of see. And I really started understanding that Islam was a lot more complicated. This part of this is probably my own maturity as I was getting older, starting to hit my 30s. Islam was more complicated. It was a lot more vast. Believing some of the presuppositions that the Salafi Dawah had some very bad consequences. If you start saying that the majority of people are on incorrect aqidah, some of them are doing shirk and some of them are doing bid'ah, then the natural conclusion of that is, well, maybe a lot of them aren't Muslim. And then you think to yourself, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound right. How is that true? There's 1 billion Muslims in the world. This doesn't make sense. And so, there was this kind of slow kind of understanding that the world is more complicated. That the issue is not so much the specific beliefs, but the methodology behind it, the usul, as it were, the manhaj, whatever you want to call it. And so I started kind of, drifting away, as it were. I'd still kind of identify myself as a Salafi, I suppose, at the time. But I wasn't, and it's interesting actually because it coincided with the time when you saw this same kind of journey with a lot of popular Salafi speakers, in a sense. The best example I can think of is Yasir Qadi.
Yeah,
actually, in the early 2000s, he's full on Wahhabi coming from Medina University. And as time's going on, he's, well, the truth's a little bit more complicated. And, this stuff about the tasawwuf, well, Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab's father was a Sufi and his brother was a Sufi, and, Milad, well, Ibn Taymiyyah himself said that Milad might be all right. Do you know what I mean? And so this was happening, around the internet as well. There were these kinds of personalities who seemed to be on a similar trajectory. I'm not trying to compare myself to them, but I think age has a lot to do with it. You calm down a little bit. What was the thing that when I was young I thought I could change the world. Now I've got older, I realize I need to change myself.
Yeah.
And there was I remember there was the Al-Kawthar and Al-Maghrib, that had been set up by Tawfiq Chaudhry, Muhammad Sharif, Yasir Qadi, Abu Isa Ni'matullah, and stuff like that. And when you start listening to them and the way that they talk, it's a lot more nuanced. It's a lot more I don't think they actually used the word Salafi at any point. They would just talk about, okay, well, the usul are this, and this is the way that you look at it, and this is the way you look at hadith, and this is the way you look at that. And so this kind of trajectory was happening. It was about that time that I started reading a bit, because now I understood that there was nothing specifically wrong in following a madhab. In fact, if you actually wanted to learn Islam, it probably made more sense. And as I said, it's interesting what quotes you find. You find quotes from Sheikh Albani, the one who is the most la madhabi of the lot, who his advice to Tulabul Ilm was first learn the madhab of your area and then move on. And it's like, well, okay, now if he's saying that, or, he said that, however many years earlier, then there's got to be something to this. And so I started, looking around and trying to be a bit more systematic as well. There's a lot of actually confusion when you're Salafi. There's a lot of confusion from what I've told about life being, simple and straightforward. Sometimes things get very complicated, even simple things. Fatiha behind the Imam, right? I remember the hour-long arguments that would occur in the back of the masjid, right, where you would talk about should you or should you not, and then someone would say, well, Bukhari made this hadith sahih, but Muslim made it daif, and then you're kind of like, well, what am I supposed to do then? I mean, I'm just the nobody. What am I supposed to do? And it became really, there was a lot of, you're always confused, you're always not sure. You want a bit of certainty. And then, as life goes on, you get fiqh masail in your life, don't you? Whatever situation turns up, and you're trying to think to yourself, well, what is the correct thing for me to do in this situation? And then you find there's a plethora of answers, each of which seem to be plausible, right? And you just get completely confused because you're like, I'm not sure what to do here. Is this halal for me to eat or not? Can I eat this or not? Or, can I do this or can I not do this? It's great that there's nuance, but you also need a little bit of order to that.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I started researching a little bit about, I suppose the best way to call it would be traditional Islam, I suppose, a kind of uh, madhab centric, continuity, institutes, that kind of thing, al-Azhar and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I came across a friend of mine who I went to university with, and he was telling me a lot about the Maliki Madhab and about how he'd met a guy that he was living with who was, a Maliki, and, there was some really, interesting ideas. And the thing that I liked about it was the fact that there seemed to be a bit of, not too much, but there seemed to be some rationality put in to this, to it, where it wasn't just textual. It was textual. It's heavily, evidence-based, but at the same time, there's a kind of overarching narrative. So I was like, oh, it's interesting. Look into a couple of things, watch a couple of Hamza Yusuf videos, this, that, and the other. Seems interesting. Okay, that's fine. I then finished some postgraduate exams. And so I actually had some free time for the first time in many years. I actually had some free time outside of work. And I thought, you know what I need to do? I need to learn Arabic. It's the key. I'm a bit embarrassed to mention how long ago this was. This was like 10 years ago, over 10 years ago.
Wow.
And at that time, my friend said, oh, my Maliki mate, he's doing Arabic classes online. Right. Now, bear in mind, I lived at the other end of the country. I didn't live next to any major Islamic center or whatever. And, this was when, your video calling and stuff like that was becoming a lot bigger. So I said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. That Maliki guy was Mufti Abu Layth.
Oh, wow.
Right. In his, how should we put it? His very early career, let me put it that way. He'd just come back from
Pakistan.
Pakistan. He'd probably been in the country for about a year or two. He was going to do a master's in psychology. To do that, he'd have to do some preparatory exams. That's how he'd met my friend, because my friend was a teacher.
Oh, wow.
And then, and I was like, why has this Pakistani guy become Maliki? How's that work?
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, so I started doing we started doing some Arabic classes with him. I still need to do a lot more, man. I still need to do a lot more. But yeah, the Arabic kind of started that way. And then because he was Maliki, I remember going around to a visit to his house and having a discussion of, okay, well, why? And he would give me the elevator pitch, as it were, right? And so that really got me interested. As much as I like, Mufti Abu Layth, there were things that I disagreed with him about. And I think that as everybody goes on their own journey and everybody has their own experiences. And there were certain aspects, not so much of his approach, but maybe approach is a fair point, actually, to say. There were just certain things that didn't sit right with me. Right. Yeah, I think approach is a good way of putting it, actually. There was a healthy skepticism, which is fine. I can understand why you might be a bit skeptical, but then there seemed to be a bit of a contrariness to it. Anyway, so I'd used to be in touch with him. I'd meet him once in a while. As I said, I lived on the other end of the country, so it's not like I used to see him often. But once in a while, we'd meet up, have a kebab or whatever, and things like that. And that's kind of where it stayed. I was, I suppose I was intellectually sold on the idea of the Maliki Madhab. In fact, I was intellectually sold on the idea of a madhab first. Then I was intellectually sold on the idea that not all the people that I thought were Ahlul Bidah were actually Ahlul Bidah. In fact, that's the majority of Ahlus Sunnah, right?
Mm.
I remember Sheikh Zahir Mahmood, he's a Deobandi alim from Birmingham. He said this fantastic thing about Ahlus Sunnah is a set of parameters. It's not one single thing. It's a set of parameters based on an approach. And if whatever you think is within those parameters, that's fine. It doesn't have to be uniformity, but there has to be an adherence to certain norms and maxims. And I mean, I found that really helpful, that comment. I then found my job changed. It's a very long story, so I'm not going to get into it. But basically, I ended up moving back to the Birmingham area, and for a variety of reasons. And so now that I was back, I was like, well, I've been away for 10 years. I need to kind of catch up on the stuff that I was missing. My friends, the ability to go out for a meal, halal meal, whatever, the ability to go to different masajid, and also, trying to reconnect with, old friends and people that, or contacts, simply that way. And it was really quite fortuitous, actually. I remember I met up with some of my dad's friends' sons, went out for a meal, and one of them said, well, I'm going to go meet a friend of mine. Really? Yeah, it's a guy that Sheikh Muhammad came to the masjid on a Dora, and I met him there, and I hadn't met him since I'd been into school or college. I mean, I didn't know who he meant by Sheikh Muhammad at the time as well. He was referring to Sheikh Muhammad Yaqubi.
Oh, okay.
And so I said, so I was like, oh, that's nice. And he said, do you want to come along? Because we'd met for lunch. That's what we'd met for lunch, and he was going to be meeting this guy in the evening. I said, yeah, okay then, fine. So I met this guy, good friend of mine now, as an optician, and as we're discussing, he mentions that he's Maliki, and I went, oh, is this the same as that Mufti Abu Layth and all that? And he was like, no, we're a bit more traditional, we're a bit less out there. I was like, oh, okay. He said, yeah. So we've been learning with this scholar Sidi Muhammad Iqbal. We're reading through some text and whatever. Would you be interested then? Are you interested? And I was like, well, yeah, you know what? I am actually. And now I've moved back, and I really want to get back into the Muslim culture of the area, and rather than everything being on the internet, whatever. And so I was like, okay, fine. I'll I'll get you in contact with him. And that was early 2018 that was. And that's when I met Sidi Muhammad Iqbal, and that was, one of the things that they say is that if you can't see the hand of God, in your life, then you're not really looking. What were the chances that I was going to meet up a contact who I've not really spoken to for many years, who then kind of gets in contact with someone that he hasn't spoken to for many years on the same day, who then happens to be a former student of Sidi Iqbal. Do you know what I mean? It's this kind of it's a chain of events that occurs that it could never be planned. Yeah. And the only way that you can explain it is that this was destiny, this was Qadr Allah, this was Allah, showing me a path, as it were. And so I started studying with him. Initially we did Akhdari, then we did Murshid al-Mu'in, then I joined in on the Risala classes. And it's been he'll be very embarrassed probably by me saying so, but he was a real opening for me. I could now understand a traditional mindset. I could understand the Maliki Madhab without, say, some of the controversies, if you want to put it that way, that Mufti Abu Layth had. It was a structured curriculum, and it fitted well, actually, with the kind of inquisitive mind that I'd had beforehand, the kind of evidence-based idea. There was a lot more of istidlal, why are you doing something like this? Well, because there's this. And you kind of go, wow, it's great. This is kind of ticking all loads of boxes for me. And so that's kind of where it's been. And that's, I'm very lucky, alhamdulillah, that I met him. I suppose there's some, if you lose your father at a young age, I suppose you look for father figures. So, maybe, Allahu Alam, maybe he had something like that about him. But, that's a very long-winded and complicated story, I suppose. But that's kind of how I ended up where I am. Now, when it comes to teaching the Maliki Madhab, I mean, I've had a couple of attempts. I mean, I feel like you're slightly over-egging it slightly. I do teach Murshid al-Mu'in, but because of COVID restrictions initially, and then one thing and another, it's not been as the reason I'm teaching is not, I mean, obviously you teach to teach other people, but I mean, actually the main reason for teaching is for me to consolidate my learning. It's for me to understand and for me to have a firm grasp, And Murshid al-Mu'in is a great text because it is fard ain knowledge. It's the knowledge that you need to be able to function, the other stuff is actual, the journey of knowledge, as it were. But this is very much the basics. And so, I've been, I tried starting teaching it in Urdu because I noticed that because of, historical and geographical reasons, there isn't a huge amount of the Maliki Madhab in Urdu. I found after a while that my Urdu wasn't good enough. And I'd keep defaulting into English words a bit. So that's kind of why that series stopped, because I found that my Urdu wasn't good enough. I suppose that's really should be an impetus for me to actually get better at my Urdu, actually. And yes, I mean, I teach to anybody who wants to listen, really. So yeah, I've just realized I've gone on for about 40 minutes. Sorry. It's a big monologue.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that the listeners and everyone will appreciate that. It's a very loaded story, very inspiring in many ways, because I believe I'm younger than yourself, if we're to go by your basic timeline of what you just said. But even I can relate to a couple of things, the Salafi movement, although I'm not too proud to admit this. I think with me, there was a hint of Salafism, but it was a bit more Tabligh Jamaat-ish. And there's a whole story about that as well. But one thing,
everybody's on a journey. Everybody's on a journey.
Yeah.
Everybody's on a journey. And it's, what was I got sent one of these memes yesterday, when someone asks, what's more important, the journey or the destination? And the reply was the company.
Exactly. Yeah, I've seen.
And I thought, and I think that's a very important thing. There is such a thing of being in the right company at the right time. And as I said, whilst I do have, I'm not exactly going to say fond memories, but I do have, memories of when I was at university and brash and Salafi, and I kind of cringe when I look back at it and think to myself some of the stupid stuff I said or did or whatever. At that point in my journey, that company was important, because otherwise, it would have been very easy to go down the whole, sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle, because this is the West. Do you know what I mean? People kind of forget, actually, sometimes if I want to get drunk, I just have to just get out my house and walk about 5 minutes to the shop. If I want to, if I want to have illicit sexual relations with someone, it's not that difficult.
Mm.
And so it really is the protection of Allah that protects you from those kinds of things. And the society is getting worse and worse, and Muslim society as well, unfortunately. And so maybe at that time in my life, that's what I needed.
Yeah.
But it was part of the journey, as it were.
Exactly.
It was part of the for the way that things work out. And there's other interesting things that I learned along the way. I learned that once a tree is taken out of its original soil, it's very difficult for it to go back. A lot of people, my kids actually have asked me, well, why didn't you just go back to the Hanafi Madhab? That's what our family was. That's where we came from. Why didn't you do that? It's like, I just couldn't. I'd seen too much, learned too much, right? That I just couldn't, it would require a bit of willful blindness for me to go back that way. I'm not trying to denigrate the Hanafi Madhab in any way, because I find it a fascinating madhab. In fact, the most interesting book I've read recently is the Journal of Hanafi Studies, published by Irshad Center, and there's some very interesting articles in that. Academic papers looking at different masalas and how the Hanafi usul work, and it's very, very interesting. So I'm not trying to denigrate, but I'm just trying to say that, once you have lost your original moorings, you have to find new moorings. You can't kind of just go back to the way things were, because too much has happened.
Exactly. Yeah. And I feel the same way about it, to be frank. Because I didn't have an issue with the Hanafi Madhab or Imam Abu Hanifa. Imam Abu Hanifa is an absolute legend. I mean, if you read his life story and everything, he was nothing short of a legend. But as you said, you grow and you get to see new company in life. You grow as a person. Things make sense differently now. And the thing is, where I was going, my trajectory, I just thought that the Maliki Madhab for me aligned perfectly with it. And other factors as well. I am from Botswana, which is in Africa. And one question I always had, maybe you did growing up in the UK as well, is that why is it that every time we need to go to big scholars, we always look at India or Pakistan or something? Like, I'm not saying that they aren't scholars, they are, but in Africa, in West Africa, you've got the Gamba, you've got all these empires that were Muslim. Islam has been on this continent since the time of the Prophet ﷺ himself. I mean, the Hijrah to Abyssinia and all that, King Negus, the whole story there. So my question was always, why do we look there and not build on our Islamic legacy that already exists? At the same time, the Maliki Madhab had a huge gestation period, if you will, in Muslim Spain, Andalusia, which is the West. It's in Europe, so the West kind of, I'm not saying it's a one-to-one with today's Spain or today's Western culture, but it's got that dynamic in it that it kind of has an appreciation, if you will, for what Western culture is and how we can navigate ourselves as Muslims, law-abiding traditional Muslims in a Western society. So all those things really fascinated me, and I just thought that for me to really fall in love with the faith again, because I had fallen out of love with it thanks to a lot of things, I really needed to take this Maliki Madhab seriously. And once upon a time, I just knew how to pray in the Maliki Madhab. But after you made the connection to see the Iqbal, I actually took it seriously. And subhanAllah, I mean, may Allah reward you for that, Doc, because I really owe you.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah,
Alhamdulillah. That's good. It's good to hear. And I'm a man who's always in need of good deeds. So
yeah.
Alhamdulillah. It's an interesting point you raise. I don't want to be. Let me rephrase that. When you're in the West, I'll give the example of when we're in the West, right? We are kind of taken away from the cultural moorings that we had. We are a different color, speaking a different language, we're following a different faith in a vastly different country with different norms and different pressures and things like that. And obviously, when the first generation of people come, they're going to look back to where they come from for ideas on how to live, and in the UK, I don't know about Botswana, but in the UK, the vast majority of Muslims are from South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. We're talking probably about 70% easily, if not more, frankly.
Yeah.
I'm probably being conservative, actually. And the problem that we had in the 90s was that we were relatively well educated, English speaking, can't really, we know Urdu, but it's not we don't know it well. So those things were a bit difficult for us to access. Then there was the whole culture religion aspect of, well, what part of this is culture, what part of this is religion? And then there's things which do feel distasteful. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
I believe in the concept of tasawwuf and all this, but some of the stuff that happens at the Sufi shrines in India, it's just nuts. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like a folk religion. Now, I suppose now I can not necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater, by just, whilst when I was a teenager and early 20s, it'll be like, oh, all of this is haram and it's all bid'ah and it's all this and it's all that, because, I was young, stupid, and thought I knew the world. So in a sense, I don't see that there's a particular thing about why do we need to, why are we always looking back to Indo-Pak? Because what you found then was that people, for example, who are Salafis, never looked back to India, Pakistan. And yet there is a large Ahlul Hadith community in India, Pakistan, which has been there for many years, which is very much, aligned with the Salafi way, about adherence to Hadith and going back to, that's where the word Wahhabi comes from. The word Wahhabi comes from the British calling the Ahl Hadith scholars in India, Pak, the Wahhabis, because they reminded them of the Wahhabi sect in Saudi, because obviously, the British Empire, being the British Empire, had its finger in many pies. So that's where the word even comes into our discourse, right? And yet there was always a thing of, well, no, we don't look at that. We just look to the Arab world. So I think so everybody has this kind of, these are authorities to be followed, and these are authorities which are not to be followed, right? And the rationale behind that is often not very good. It's caught up in, it's not actually based on intellectual rigor. It's not actually bent on academia or whatever. Again, culture plays its part as well. I actually find that the Muslim culture in South Asia is very interesting. And let me recount a story, which I hope will explain it. So 2006, 2007 time, as probably people know, there was the insurgency in Iraq was bad. It had been 2-3 years since the Americans and the British had gone in, and the place was absolute chaos. This is before ISIS and Al-Qaeda. This is just the different militias and everybody trying to take control. And the forerunners of ISIS, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, started a very sectarian campaign. They were blowing up Shia masajid and bombing Ashura processions and stuff like that. And I remember, being on the internet, coming across some kind of, discussions on, internet forum boards and things like that, where Iraqi and Iranian Shias are saying, we need to dial down the rhetoric about Sunnis, because obviously, they have a lot of antipathy, should we put it that way, towards the Sahaba and the wives of the Prophet. We need to dial this down, because if we stop, the more we provoke, the more bombings we're getting, right? and they're literally living, they're living on that. Everybody had lost someone in this kind of civil war that was going on. And on these same boards, these same discussion boards, you would get Indian and Pakistani Shias coming up and saying, of course we have to denounce the Sahaba, of course we have to denounce the wives of the Prophet, we can't compromise our Aqidah for this, for that, and the other. And I was like, you're living somewhere else. This is a life or death situation for these people. But why is it you're thinking like this? And what it interestingly reminded me of was Salafis who are from India, Pakistan. They would say stuff like, you can't pray behind Hanafis. Can't pray behind any Hanafis. Barelvi, Deobandi, full stop. Can't pray. Right? You not only that, you can only go to certain Ahl Hadith masajid. You can only go to this, that, and the other. And I would sit there going, you do realize there's a rise of Hindu fundamentalism in India, Pakistan, right? Where, unfortunately, we're seeing it now, innit? Basically, it's full-on fascism, right? Instead of thinking about that and trying to work as a Muslim community to try and deal with that, you're fighting amongst yourselves. Why is it? What is it about the Indo-Pak culture that is so sectarian? Whatever sect it might be, right? What is it about it? And I came up with this theory, and it's just a theory, and I might be wrong, that I feel it's a hangover from the caste system. Okay, because if you look at the caste system, there's a lot of delineation of we're this, you're that. We're this, you're that. We do this, you do that. We don't mix with you, you don't mix with us. Why? Because you're high or you're low, right? And there's lots of antipathy between, and people will be like, well, we don't hang around with them. Why? Because they're Yadavs and we're Patels or whatever. I mean, I'm not as, I apologize if I'm offending anyone. And I feel that that's kind of in the Indo-Pak, what you call a viewpoint, the way that they look at things, or where the Brelvis and they're the Deobandis, or where the Ahledis and where the Shia and where they're the Sunnis, and we don't mix and we don't talk and this, that, and the other. And therefore, and if you don't mix and talk, then you get conflict because you don't see the other person as a human being. You see them as something else. Because you don't see this. It was interesting. Again, if you start looking at, okay, we'll talk about Salafis, for example. If you want to find the most extreme, hardcore fatwa on a specific masla, go to the Salafis of Indo-Pak. You'll find the Saudis are more liberal.
Wow.
Yeah? And forget about the others, the Egyptians and whatever, right? And I think that mindset percolates deeply so that everything is very adversarial. I mean, they're having debates here now in the UK, Brelvis and Deobandis about, Ahmad Raza Khan said this and Haji Imdadullah said that. And you're kind of like, dude, these are 150-year-old Muslims. Well, what are you arguing about? Why? What's the need? Right?
Exactly.
Et cetera, et cetera. And so, therefore, what then happens is that people get put off and they're like, you know what? I'm not even going to look into it. I'm not interested, right? I heard a quote once. No, I didn't hear quotes. I made the quote, I remember, actually. I made the quote. It was after a discussion with Sidi Iqbal. I said, maybe it's time not to listen to any scholarship east of the Suez.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm being far too pretentious by saying something like that. But the point I was trying to say is that there's just so much baggage.
Exactly.
Right. There's so much baggage. And I think that's one of the refreshing aspects of the Maliki Madhab, because it's been in North Africa, West Africa for a long time. It has a period in which it was the dominant Sharia in a country with a mixed population. That's Andalusia, Spain. The fact that, even till the end, it wasn't 100% Muslim country. There was lots of Christians, lots of Jews, You know, so there's lots of fiqh masail that have been dealt with, you know, about how you deal with, you know, people of the book and people this. And so in that sense, I find that's one of the main attractions, because you still got this long period of scholarship, and you as a person who's studying it doesn't have any of the cultural hang-ups that we would if we were in India, Pakistan, or even if we were in Saudi.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, so I mean, so that's what's so refreshing. The only thing that I think at some point, you know, it needs wider adoption, and because I can imagine life being, and actually asked Siddiq Iqbal once this, life can be a bit lonely as a Maliki.
Yeah.
You know, you find yourself in the masjid and you're the only one doing sadr, for example.
And they look at you like you're butchering live children or something. That's how scandalous it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you know, from their perspective, you know, I mean, you know, can't blame them. You know, the only people that they've probably ever seen praying with their hands down are Shias beforehand.
Yeah.
So I mean, you know, I can't blame them for that. And I think in that sense, it can be a little bit, you know, maybe inshallah, you know, if it propagates more and we start, you know, getting, because at the moment in the UK, we've probably got, off the top of my head, I can probably only think of 2, maybe 3 masajid, which are mainly Maliki. And considering that there's, you know, excess of 600, 700 masjids in the UK, it's not many.
No.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, it used to be being the guy that did Rafa then in a Hanafi masjid was the weird thing.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, Southern, you can imagine, it's just completely, and so I do sometimes wish that there was wider adoption. There were maybe more North African communities, West African communities who were, you know, really trying to advance and promote the Maliki Madhab. Maybe it's just a question of time. You know, as I said, there was a time when, you know, it was very weird to be the one guy doing Rafa then in the masjid, and now, you know, even people who are nominally Hanafis are doing Rafa then because they've all seen the hadith about it. You know, which is you know, it's just way things are. I do think there are certain aspects of certain madhabs which kind of do appeal to people. It's that thing I was saying about, you know, medicine. You know, for some people, being very textual and very evidence-based, as in, you know, having literally a piece of evidence in front of you is more important. For some people, it's you know, having general rules, for some, whatever it might be. And, you know, I think as long as you've got to a stage in your life where you think to yourself, I'm going back to what Sheikh Zahir said, it's a set of parameters. So long as you're within the set of parameters, alhamdulillah. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
I don't like the characterization sometimes people have, because some people now start saying, oh, you're only Maliki because it's easy. It's like,
I've heard that. I've got that myself. So yeah, I'd like to hear your rebuttal to that.
Yeah, well, my rebuttal is that's just fundamentally it's a misreading, because it's just not true. Yeah, it's just not true, right? I mean, you know, you know the rules around fasting. You know, if you are in a room and you accidentally inhale smoke, your fast is gone in the Maliki Madhab.
Yep.
Right? Because you have taken something into your stomach, that violates, you know, that. Okay. Or the fact that you can't, non-Muslims aren't allowed into the masjid. You know, we're in a non-Muslim country in this, you know, in the UK, and our fiqh says you can't allow non-Muslims into the country. Yet, if people are interested in Islam, where are they going to go?
Exactly.
You know, so it's just an ignorance, I think, of the madhab, really. I think, so I think that's where people get it from. I've heard my kids have even said it once, and I said, no, that's not the case. The only difference is that we're a little bit more relaxed on different views because we have different views within our madhab.
Exactly.
We do have people who would say that the correct way to pray is X, or the correct way to do this is Y, or whatever, and it's all valid within the madhab. We have multiple sub schools. We have the Iraqis, we have the Egyptians, we have the North Africans, we have the West Africans, and there's differences between them, I think because of that fact that we're a lot more, well, look, these are set of parameters. As long as you're within the set of parameters, it's fine. Rather than this is the only thing that you can do. People take that as leniency. It's not leniency. It's just being mature and grown up.
Mm. Exactly. And
care to savor some authentic Pakistani dessert? Fancy some brownies? Need a specialized package for a special event? Batch by Zahra has got you covered. Call or WhatsApp 74755 and get your batch now. A generous helping at an absolutely unbeatable price. Attested to be absolutely tasty by us here at The Scholar and the Student. Alright.
And I think you put it very beautifully, and I'm going to start using that from now, but maybe I'll just put copyright Dr. Majid Shaikh afterwards. Yeah, anyway, since you keep up bringing your kids, I really had this question. I asked it to CD Iqbal as well. He gave me an answer. There are many ways of answering it. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Your kids are growing up in the UK, which is a multicultural environment. Okay, there are lots of things going on. I just wanted to ask, when it comes to the Maliki Madhab, since you teach the Maliki Madhab and they're going to school, whether it's Islamic school or whatever else, they're interacting with other Muslims who are definitely not Maliki. They go to the masjid and they see people are praying with qabd, whether it's the Shafi way or the Hanafi way, and they see their fathers praying sadl. Obviously, as a teenager, I don't know if they are, but as a teenager, you think my dad's an idiot.
They are teenagers.
Okay, so I don't know if they think that, but it's kind of natural as a teenager to think my dad's probably an idiot or something, so that's why he prays like that. How have you, since they were born, how have you taught them the Maliki Madhab, and what's your approach to this? Because you talked about wider adoption of the Maliki Madhab. At the same time, that's not going to happen by us having this iron fist approach, because we know that doesn't work, and it would be hypocritical because you and me both came from Hanafi backgrounds and then later went on into the Maliki Madhab, and we had the freedom to do that. My parents never came to me and said, this is something wrong, you shouldn't do that. And they just gave me the freedom, and they saw that I was with CD Iqbal and they gave me that freedom. So how do you deal with the fact that maybe one day your kids might grow up and they might decide to be Hanbali, for example? What's your approach been so far? And that kids are going to grow into their own thing religiously and in every different field as they grow up. What's your approach going to be in the future?
Okay, so this might be a slightly unpopular position to say, but I don't actually care about the fiqh.
Okay.
Yeah. I follow the Maliki Madhab, right? It jimes well with the way that I look at things. If my kids want to know how to pray, I just tell them the way that I pray, because that's what I know, right? And then if they, as has happened, and they've come back and they said, well, why are we praying this way and they're praying that way? He'd go, well, there's different ways to pray. Everybody's got their own evidences. Everybody, there's certain things that everybody agrees on. And so as long as you follow the set of parameters, as I said, the wide set of parameters of first the madhab and then, the Ahlus Sunnah in general, it's all fine. It's all okay. And, they will, in one sense, I remember I mentioned earlier that my parents were religious with a small r.
Yeah.
I actually think that's more important. I think it's more important that you just have a culture in your house, which my parents did have, alhamdulillah, right? And I try and I'm trying to replicate it in my household, where the deen isn't necessarily an academic exercise.
Yeah.
I've taken it as an academic exercise in the sense that I want to learn. right? And even that, why am I learning? I'm learning it to, for the sake of Allah. I'm not learning it just out of, so can I have a degree or whatever, amal, practice is what's important, right? And so just to have that culture within the house of, oh, come on, Dad, should we go pray Maghrib? We've just got enough time. We can grab it at the mosque. That kind of stuff, yeah. Or like, wake up one morning and it's like, oh, go to one of my sons. Have you not had breakfast? He goes, oh, no, I'm just making up some of my fasts. It's like, I've not had to say anything. I've not had to go and say to him, you do this. Otherwise, I'm going to slap you about, right? I've just tried to make it an organic, as I said, just, it's just the way you think, I remember when I was a kid and when I went, sorry, not when I was a kid, when I first went to uni, I first came across the concept of Muslims who don't pray. I had never come across this concept before in my life. Remember, I lived in a white town. The only Muslims I knew were basically my own family, right? And whether you prayed late, whether you prayed like a woodpecker, 2 seconds, whatever, you prayed 5 times a day.
Yeah.
The idea that somebody just wouldn't pray because they can't be bothered was completely alien to me. I still don't understand it. We had some people come around once and it was Ramadan and, they came around for iftar and I found it very fascinating how they sat and ate all the food and we prayed and they didn't pray with us. And I was kind of like, you do realize you're kind of missing the point here. It's better for you not to fast and pray than to fast the 18-hour day that we had in those days, but not pray the 5 minutes it takes to pray Maghrib. It's kind of, so what I have tried to do is just make it an organic thing, and then when they come up and ask for specific masala, that like, or I want to do tahajjud, how do I do tahajjud? As an example, right? Or, how many sunan should I do after Maghrib? The answers I give are the ones from the Maliki Madhab because that's what I know.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I can say. If they go out and they come back and they say, well, I saw people doing this, I go, it's fine. It's fine for them to do that. They want to do it that way. If you want to do it that way, if that gives you a connection to Allah, yeah, be my guest. I'm not if it's one thing I learned from being a Salafi is not to be dogmatic. Because if you become dogmatic, people don't do stuff, right? There's a story which I read which I heard many years ago, 15 years ago now, of the great Deobandi alim, Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanvi. And he was in one of his majalis, and he was well known for criticizing Milad. Not criticizing the concept of Milad, but what some of the people did. They would go out on Milad Julus, they would, everything would be decked out in green and, people do all sorts of stuff, right? And there was a man who came to him in his majlis and asked him, he had a bit of a chat with him and then asked him and said, so can I go on Milad Julus then? Right? The procession. And Maulana said, yes, you can. And he went, okay, fine. And then he went. The students who were with the Sheikh were like, but Sheikh, you keep telling people that they can't do stuff like this. You can't, this stuff is bid'ah, and there's lots of haram that happen, there's mixing, there's music, there's this, there's women, all that sort of stuff. Why have you just allowed this guy to do that? And he said that after speaking to him, I realized that this man did nothing of Islam. He didn't pray, he didn't fast, he did nothing. The only thing that he did was once a year he went on Milad Julus to celebrate the birth of the Prophet. That was his connection to Allah. I wasn't going to take that away from him. Do you see what I mean? It's
exactly.
You have, so whatever, and as I said, being a Salafi, that we were told so many things were bid'ah, so many things were this, so many things were wrong, that we just didn't do anything. Because you didn't know if what you were doing was right. You didn't want to be getting a sin for it, so you just didn't do it. And so that's why you get the joke of, oh, the Wahhabis, they never pray their sunnahs. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it is based in a bit of fact in that, because if you don't know what to do, right, unless you replace something with something,
Mm.
then you've not gained anything. You know, if yes, somebody is doing something which is incorrect, and you go to him and you say, look, this thing that you're doing, right, you know, bro, this isn't correct, this isn't according to the Sunnah, right, but you could do this instead, and this is according to the Sunnah. That's a much better situation. That's what this whole thing is about, isn't it? It's about a connection with God. Yeah.
Exactly. Mm.
And that's what's important. And so you know, just going back to my kids, if my kids come back and they say, well, actually, you know what, I actually quite like doing X, whatever it might be.
Mm.
Qunut in witr is a good example,
Yeah.
right? All right. I actually like it because, you know, I get to do my duas and I actually get to this, that. It's like, alhamdulillah, go ahead.
Mm.
That, you know, I know that's not the mashhur opinion of the Maliki Madhab.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if that's what gives you a connection with Allah, then that's what it is. And
Mm.
that's what's important. So, you know, I've realized that it's all about being organic. It's all about
Mm.
just doing. It's all, you know, rather than necessarily talking about it. You know, having, okay, what we're, so me and my sons, one of the things that we've done while we've moved to this area, it's been what, 6 years now since we moved back. We use this thing called random masjid,
Okay.
where say Maghrib or Isha, we'll go, let's just go to a random mosque, just a
Mm.
different, you know, and we've been to, mashallah, 40, 50 masajid now, you
MashaAllah.
know, over the years.
Mm.
And it's just like, oh, this is a nice masjid. Oh, this is a nice one. Oh, this has got, oh, the recitation here is really nice. Oh,
Mm.
those guys are all mainly Africans. Oh, do you see how they did it?
Mm.
And it just becomes an experiential, organic thing rather than a thing about well, this is the correct way of doing it, and this is the way that I'm taught how to do it, and this is, and that and the other, right? And there's another thing that Sidi mentions, and you know, it's something that I try and implement, is doing things, small things regularly,
Yes.
and making it a habit, right?
Mm.
And making it a habit for your kids as well. You know, I don't, alhamdulillah, have to tell my son to recite Surah Mulk every night. He just does it
Mm.
because he's been doing it for so long. You know, it's just a regular thing that he does now. I don't have to tell him, alhamdulillah. You know, this may make it sound like I'm a perfect parent. I really am not. I'm really not. But uh, you've got to see sometimes we don't see the wood for the trees.
Mm.
We get so hung up on the letter of the law, we forget the spirit of the law.
Exactly.
And I
Mm.
think that's important. And I think that's one of the things that I learned uh, from Sidi Iqbal, but also, you know, just as I grew up, as I matured, and, you know, what gets you that connection with God? If it gets you that
Exactly.
connection with God, great.
Mm.
If it's not 100% in accordance to the Maliki Madhab, it's not a big deal, mate. It really isn't. As long as it's within the parameters of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jamaat, right? Fair enough, mate.
MashaAllah, that's a very beautiful answer. Gives me, because I was really perplexed about how to approach that. I don't have kids, by the way, but it is something I'd have to deal with one day. So I was always weighing up the options, how to approach it. So I think going by what you said and what Sidi Iqbal said, it gives me a lot more leeway to do it. But just to add on to that question, you being from the UK are very familiar with your madrasa system. You probably took part in it when you were a kid. I think it's the same thing as we had. Oh, you didn't? Okay, I guess
I
you're.
didn't know because
Mashallah.
remember I said I was in a white town.
I see. I see.
Yeah,
Okay,
we didn't
great.
have a masjid, and
Oh,
so
okay.
my mother is who taught me my Quran.
MashaAllah.
My
Oh,
my
that's
mother
great.
taught me my Quran, my sabaks, and all this kind of stuff. And actually, my mother even now is the one. Even though we do have madrasas now where we live, my
Yeah.
mother is the one who still teaches my son.
Oh, MashaAllah. That's great.
You
Not,
know,
you're blessed.
so yeah, no, alhamdulillah. And see, this is what I mean by it's just organic.
Mm-hmm.
It's just my mom would make a point of, you know, okay, now, okay, it's 5:30. It's time for your Arabic lesson. Let's just sit
Yeah.
down and read. Yeah, and she'd just do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's
Yeah.
just what she did. And it was, as I said, it was just organic. It was
Mm-hmm.
just kind of, oh, you know, what time is it now? Oh, I need to go pray Maghrib. Hold on, let me do Maghrib, then we'll have dinner. You know, it wasn't kind of like a big song and dance about, you know, um, I tried to get my kids into the madrasa system. The only person only my daughter's the only one who's kind of really gelled and stayed in it for a while.
Huh?
The boys, alhamdulillah, I was also lucky actually that one of the things that you do find is if you do have I find that sometimes things come up in the most strange places. So whilst I was saying that when we lived in the north of England, there weren't that many Muslims. The few that were there were mainly a couple of them were Arabs, and they actually made a point of, well, okay, we haven't got a madrasa here. We'll set up a Sunday school.
Mm.
Yeah, and so my boys used to go to that Sunday school. And I did remember thinking to myself, I quite like this Sunday school because it's full of Arabs, Malaysians, Indians, Pakistanis, Bengalis. The idea that Muslims are just my background, but the idea that Muslims can be of any background, my kids learned that very early on. That wasn't from me. That was just that's from Allah.
Exactly. That's amazing. No, that's mashallah, you're really blessed to have a mother like that. But my point being still, if I can follow on from that, my point was, okay, do you know brother Muhib Rashid? He's also in Birmingham, if I'm not mistaken. He's one of, Momo Dutal, right? One of his friends. Yeah. So they kind of hang out together. Anyway, I saw something from him and I knew it was the case, but he just brought it to the forefront, talking about, there has to be a better system to learning the words of Allah besides this madrasa thing, because he made a point of certain ones are getting kind of ridiculous because they literally check your kids' haircuts, like if it's a fade or not, and they get just very OTT about that sort of thing. Yeah. My question was, okay, there's that. And then I'll say it openly, I've got personal gripes, even though I came from that background, I've got personal gripes with Tabligh Jamaat. I can go into that if you want to, but basically, if I'm going to be a dad, I don't exactly have I wouldn't send my son to those guys with an open heart, like go for 3 days or something, because I know what it's about and I've got my issues with it. So how would you approach that situation where, this is something, quote unquote, part of the Islamic culture, but I really don't want it for my kids because of all the baggage it's going to bring? How do you deal with that? What's your answer to that, Doc?
So again, I think it's about knowing what it is that you're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
And if what it is that you're trying to achieve is getting your children to be able to read the Arabic script, to read the Quran, to memorize the Quran, well, you are the first teacher, right? People like to outsource their parental obligations.
Yeah.
The obligation is not on the masjid to teach your kid the Quran. The obligation is on you to teach your kid the Quran. Yeah. And there's no point sending them to a madrasa where, they're kind of, it's a punishment almost to go and learn, right? Rather than, as I said, something organic that, they're interested in doing. The thing about, remember we were saying something about earlier on about how people look back to where they're from and how they copy that, right? A lot of the systems that we have, the madrasa system, if you want to put it that way, the people who are in charge of that, whether it's Tabligh Jamaat, whether it's Bilal, whoever it might be, is very much rooted in the 19th century.
Yeah, it is.
And it needs updating, not because in of itself it's wrong. I don't think there's actually anything bad in essence with the madrasa system as it is. It's just that it's not suited for this time.
Yeah.
Right. I'll give an example, right? I've not really been with Tabligh Jamaat, but obviously met lots of people, right? And they'll talk about, go for 3 days, go for 6 weeks, go for 4 months, all this kind of stuff, right? If you look into the history of how Tabligh Jamaat started, right? It was a late 1800s, early 1900s. The British had now fully taken control of India, right? And so the in most Muslim countries, even to this day, you have a Ministry of Religious Affairs, don't you? Like the Diniyat in Turkey, the Lajna in Saudi, etc., right? So when the British took over, after the mutiny, 1857 mutiny, and they had direct rule of the Indian subcontinent, they demolished all those systems. Right? There was no, there was no Mufti of India. Right? There was no minister of religious affairs. Right? It was just left to the people because the British didn't care really. As long as they got their money out of it, they weren't that bothered. Right? So then what happened was that people had to make their own. And so, masjids sprung up, institutes sprung up, like Darul Uloom Deoband, as an example. Jamia Ashrafia in Bareilly, as an example. Jamia Nadwa, things like this. Darul Nadwa, sorry. And there was, at that time, independence movement was starting, and there was a lot of work done by Hindu activists to try and reconvert the Muslims, Arya Samaj. And at that point, that's when some of the ulama were like, Muslims really don't know anything. And they're susceptible to this, this dawah, if you want to call it that way. Right? And so they came up with this system of where we will go and we will try and get people back into the masjid, right? And things like that. And since you couldn't go and do jihad anymore because you weren't in control of the state, what kind of going out in the sake of Allah can you do? Well, if you're a farmer in northern India, for 3 months, you have to leave your fields fallow, right? And so going on Jamaat for 3 months, it's fine. Because it's not like you're doing anything anyway. Yeah. And, it was a way of reintroducing, getting Islam back into the culture, getting people practicing, getting people to go to the masjids and whatever. The problem is it's not 1920 anymore, right? It's 2023 now, right? And what's happened is that those decisions that they made back then have been taken as the rules. These are the rules. This is the way it should be done. We should have a madrasa. We should have 2 hours a day you send your kids. We should, we don't want them to look anything like Westerners. We don't want them to wear ties and wear trousers and have funky hairstyles and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, it kind of does make sense in 1920, 1923. It doesn't make sense in 2023. It's like I was telling one of my sons the other day that there was a famous Hanafi fatwa from that time, which said that if you wore a tie, you are kafir.
Wow.
Right? And my son was like, well, that just sounds crazy. And I went, think about it. In the 1910s, 1920s, what did most Muslims wear? They wore their traditional clothing. They had beards, wore their topis, things like that. If you made a point of not wearing any of that and going around in a suit with a tie, you were clearly trying to copy the kuffar, weren't you? At that point, in 1923 in Delhi, right? So if somebody comes out with a fatwa like that, whilst I don't agree with it even then, you can at least understand why somebody came up with that. Because, the only people who did that were people who were rejecting Islam and people who were becoming modern and, this kind of stuff. It's completely irrelevant now. But our institutions are still following those fatwa. I'm not saying that there's anybody out there literally saying, if you wear a tie or a kafir, but I'm just giving the example that a lot of the fatwa that came out around that time are still being followed now. Like you're saying about, making sure what their haircuts are like and have they got fades and are they coming in a, kurta pajama with a topi or whatever, all these kinds of things, the emphasis on tajweed, which is mashallah fantastic, but not an emphasis on meaning. It's still shocking to me how few people have read translations of the Quran. Yeah. And, even people who are practicing.
Exactly.
People who pray and stuff like that. So, as I said, I think a lot of it depends on what it is you're trying to achieve and what is it you're trying to do. And if, for example, your thing is, look, I've already got an Islamic environment in my house, this, that, and the other. I just want them to help to what you call memorize, because I myself don't know enough Quran that I can teach them, then alhamdulillah, send them to a madrasa if that's what you think, right? And if they come back and say, well, the guy's telling me I shouldn't have my hair cut like this and that, and then you go, okay, fine, they're a bit traditional, just leave them, it's all right, they're only trying to do the right thing, nobody's doing this out of ill intent, right? If on the other hand you're like, I'm not going to do anything, right, and I'm going to outsource the religious stuff to the masjid, then mate, you've lost already, because you're not taking your obligations seriously. The first teacher is the parent, the first school is the home. As I said, as long as you think about why you're doing what you're doing, it's all right.
All right.
So I mean, as I said, I'm trying not to throw the baby out with the bathwater anymore.
Yeah. No, I hear you. And based on your experiences, I'm sure that makes a lot of sense. And it does give me a bit more confidence as well. I mean, I have to marinate with the ideas and really.
I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, you're responsible for your children.
Exactly.
And you have to do what you think is the right thing for your children.
Exactly.
And that is different for different people. I've been very insistent, for example, that my daughter goes to an Islamic school, even though it's not a very good school, to be completely honest. It's very badly run. It's not free. I have to pay for it. But I know what life is like in the UK. I know what teenage girls are like in the UK, and I want, and even if it means I give them a slightly substandard secular education, at least if I give them some kind of environment which is a little bit better than a normal school, I'll take it. So it's you have to kind of weigh up everything. I didn't necessarily think the same for my boys, because not because there's some kind of bias, but just because by the time they got to an age, by the time that I had even the option of sending to an Islamic school, they were already well into their late teens. They were already 16, 17 years old. So it's kind of like, oh, I've missed the boat now, so there's no real point me trying now.
Inshallah. It's it's a lot of great stuff you've got going on there. So I'd also have to marinate with the ideas and really make them my own. But if we can come back to yourself now, Doc, you've got other interests besides giving people anesthesia and trying to study the Maliki Madhab and teach people in your not so great Urdu. Dr. Majid has been sending me a lot of music on my Instagram for the last, 2 or 3 weeks. And it's been amazing because I'm really enjoying it. Well, he's introduced me to Manic Street Preachers, and I actually didn't care much about Guns N' Roses after their first album, and he just regurgitated or resurfaced the love of Guns N' Roses in my heart. So props to you, Doc, for that. So would you like to tell us a bit more about your musical journey? Because you also have a podcast episode on your platform about you and video games and your relationship to them. Like I said, I'm a bit younger than yourself, so Nintendo 64 and all that, Commodore 64, whatever it was, I didn't get to see all of that, but I was around for computer gaming when it sort of took off in the 2000s, so I might be able to meet you halfway there. So music and games, how did you get into that? And you did mention that you once upon a time fell out of music because music is haram. Now you're kind of back on, because that's where I am too. So let us know about that.
Okay. So again, a lot to unpack there, right? So I was always into technology. I was an 80s kid. The golden age of computing, Commodore 64s, Amstrad, Spectrums, Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, all that sort of thing. The Amiga, I was a big Amiga fanboy. And so I was always into technology. And then around the age of 15, I discovered heavy metal. It's a classic time to discover it, isn't it? Nirvana and Metallica and stuff like that. And I always felt conflicted by it, because I always heard this stuff in the back of my mind saying, well, music's supposed to be a bad thing. It's not supposed to be something you're doing, and this, that, and the other. But again, it's company, isn't it? The people I met when I was at my school, a lot of them were into that kind of music. I learned a bit how to play guitar, and I used to do a bit of that, and I kind of thought, and I would see Sufi music at that time, and I said, well, it can't be all bad, because this stuff is done, this stuff happens, and it's supposedly religious, and people do it, and so maybe, you know, it can't all be bad, put it that way. Maybe it's the culture that's the problem. You know, the gig culture, the festival culture of you going and, you know, getting, you know, hooking up, you know, taking drugs. Maybe that's what's the haram bit. If it's just me listening to something on a CD, what's the big deal, right? Anyway, I then went to, as you know, kind of paralleling, you know, this aspect. You know, I then went to university, got involved with the Salafis, and they're like, no. By asal music is haram. You are not allowed. And it's like, yeah, but what about all those Sufi Qawwali guys and all that, and the Naats and the this, that, and the other? And it's like, oh no, that's all bidah. Okay, so they're all wrong. Yes. Okay. Remember, that was my frame of mind at the time. So, you know, I got rid of my guitar. I remember throwing a whole bunch of CDs in the bin. I only lasted about 6 weeks. I'm gonna be honest. Not, you know, what I mean by that is that you know, I remember getting rid of everything and then, you know, not listening to anything for like 6 weeks, and then after a while, just finding myself just putting the radio back on. I used to have quite a bit of driving in those days, putting the radio back on, listening to things again. But I always felt guilty about it. I always felt guilty about it. And I was just like, okay, look, this is just my thing. I can't get it out of my system. You know, it's just blah, blah, blah. Anyway, time goes on. And because of the fact that I discovered music, I got out of gaming. And this was around exactly the time when the PS1 was released. Right. So therefore, that entire period from, say, the PS1 till probably the PS3, actually, if I want to be brutally honest about it, I just wasn't involved with gaming. Just what wasn't a thing, because and you know, initially I did have music along, but even that then disappeared as well, as I said. And life was, you know, it's stressful life as a doctor, you know, 56 hours a week, night shifts, postgraduate exams, this, that, and the other. As I mentioned earlier, you know, when I was having this kind of period of my life when I was then reevaluating things and starting to look at some of the masalas again, and again, music became one of these things of, well, actually, it isn't so cut and dry. There is no asal thing about it, right? There's plenty of fatwa that's showing that it's permissible. And so I kind of slowly got back into it by thinking that, actually, you know what, maybe I was right the first time round. It's not the thing in itself, it's the stuff around it. You know, we know heavy metal often has satanic undertones, like literally. Yeah. Obviously, I can't imagine any alim saying that's permissible. Do you know what I mean? Let's be honest about it, right? And yes, you know, a lot of the kind of, I've actually heard Sidi Iqbal say this actually as well. A lot of the stuff around the music, the gig culture, you know, the girls, the drugs, the drink, you know, all of that. That's all clearly haram. Yeah. And it's interesting actually that when you look at a lot of the fatwa that say, especially in the Indo-Pak, when they talk about music, what are they referring to? They're referring to the courtesan culture of the Mughal period, where people would go and watch dancing girls and drink and have opium. And so then they'd say, oh, this is haram. Well, I can completely understand that because, you know, it's leading to so many, you know, haram activities, right? Sadd zarai, as we talk about, you know, closing the door. But I realized that the asal, there was nothing actually wrong with the asal of it. There was nothing wrong in of itself of making musical tones, whether it be on a drum or a guitar or whatever it be. It's all about, you know, the stuff around it. And yes, if someone is singing, you know, yes, kill your mother and kill your father and, you know, put a cross of Satan on your face. Yeah, I can't imagine that being halal in any situation. But let's be honest, most of it isn't like that.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of music isn't like that. You know, it's just a caricature, especially of rock music.
Yeah.
You know, there's lots of other types and whatever. And so, you know, it's been a slow process of getting back into it. You know, I've bought some new guitars. I find myself spending far too much time on YouTube learning how to play certain songs and then realizing that I don't have the physical dexterity to do that. Um, and things like that. And I do find it very relaxing. I do listen to a lot of nasheeds, naats, qawalis. I do find them actually genuinely very spiritually uplifting. There's something about the music of Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. There's something
Yeah.
about the way that I don't know what it is, but there's just something about it. It hits you. It hits you like a ton of bricks. The gaming side, I have tried multiple times to get back into it. I've got back into technology a lot. I'm now also a tech podcaster. In fact, later on this evening, I've got my technology podcast on Linux.
Great.
So yeah, I've still got to do all my show notes for that actually.
Okay.
I used to do reviews of phones, reviews of laptops for a couple of websites. But I've not really managed to get back into gaming properly. And I think part of it is I was used to an era of 2D gaming.
Yeah, I remember
of 2D
that.
gaming and of limited controls. You either went forward, backwards, left, right, you either punched or you kicked. Do you see what I mean?
Exactly.
Whilst, when I look at my kids who've got PS4s, PS5s or whatever, it's a lot, the controllers are a lot more three-dimensional. There's, the way their hands work, man, seriously, it's maybe I'm just showing my age now. And so I've tried multiple times to get back into gaming. I've never managed to do it. I do retro gaming. So I managed to set up a couple of emulation things. Emulation software, and played all old Street Fighter 2, Sensible Soccer, Virtua Fighter when it first came out, that kind of thing. I've done a bit of that. I would love to get back into it. I really would. I said every time I've tried, I just haven't been able to. In fact, I'm going to ask you actually, as someone who is a bit of a gamer, how do I get back into it?
Well, that's a good question because, even with myself, I don't game as much as I should because a lot of these games, the RPGs, those are like full-time jobs, literally. I mean, it's fun, but you really need to think. On Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I think I have sunk in 180 hours, or so my PC tells me. But okay, in my defense, that was COVID. It came out literally in October 2020, and I was doing nothing at home, and I graduated. That's the year I got out of law school. So I'm like, I might as well play this game. So I did everything I could in that game. So there's that. I'd say maybe...
I remember buying an Xbox Series S in COVID, in COVID lockdown, specifically for the reason of I need to get back into gaming. I'm not doing anything sat at home. I just couldn't do it. Do it. Maybe I've not got the patience. That's the other thing, maybe.
Yeah. I think I would suggest then, Doc, if you're not going to go and put in 180 hours because that's a full-time job, maybe take out something like that's a bit more short and cinematic. Like, for example, I think you've heard of Uncharted, for example, because those games literally are like blockbuster movies, but you're actually playing them. So perhaps that could be a good gateway into it because they're not open world even. I mean, as far as I understand, it's a bunch of levels, which are semi-open world. You can do a bunch of stuff in them, but it's got a set story, and the story doesn't have a billion different combinations of what could happen. The ending could change and all that stuff. I mean, that is a whole different geekdom or nerddom that you can get into later, but I think something as straightforward as that could work. Even the older Assassin's Creeds, I would even, if you want to get into open world gaming, I would give them, Assassin's Creed 1, 2, 3, even until 4. I think that's when it was still relatively small compared to what's coming out now in the Assassin's Creed franchise. So maybe look into those.
What about the Witcher games? What about the Witcher games? I've heard a lot of good stuff about the Witcher games.
Well, definitely.
And I do like the Witcher Netflix series as well.
Yeah, well, just don't play that in front of your kids. But I haven't played them myself. Yeah, you guys can kill me and pitchfork me later. I haven't played them myself, but I've always heard good stuff about it. The reason why I didn't play them is because of the reputation they got. You see, the first Witcher game came out in 2007. That was my final year of primary school. There's no way I was going to play something like that at that age. I think I was 12 years old. So, yeah. And then I never really bothered with The Witcher, but I guess you see The Witcher 3, that's a full-on RPG. So that's another one of those games with, I don't know how many hours you're going to sink into it, but yeah, it's got a bunch of different endings, choices that you can make. So if you want to get immersed into that world, I guess there is that. There's also Skyrim, which is also, people used to say, if you're going to play Skyrim, then RIP to your social life, because you will literally be role-playing that character that you create in Skyrim. So yeah, those options are there, but I was just looking at, you know, your time commitments and everything.
I think Uncharted is probably the way to go, I think.
Yeah.
Because it's finding the time for this kind of stuff as well, isn't it?
Exactly. Exactly. Uncharted, or even the latest God of War. People call it God of War 4. Like God of War and God of War Ragnarok, they're the latest entries. They were for the PS, they were for the PS5. And PS4, I think. But yeah, the latest ones, those are also cinematic compared to the older ones. So those might also be worth a shot.
Okay. I think my son's got God of War Ragnarok, actually.
Yeah, it's the latest one that came out. Yeah.
So I might try that out. But yeah, it's because whenever I have done any bit of gaming, it's always been kind of it's either been football games or Street Fighter, things which aren't necessarily immersive games, if you know what I mean. Okay, that's an interesting one. I've tried getting into mobile gaming as well, and I found a couple of good ones, but again, I think a lot of it is obviously you don't have the kind of RPG style, or you don't have many of them on mobile because of the nature of the beast, as it were. But you do get quite a few good casual games, the kind of ones you can just pick up, blast for about 5-10 minutes, and get back in, Brawl Stars and things like that.
That's tough. I think Injustice 2 is also on mobile. I used to have it back in the day, but it was just sucking up too much system memory and whatnot. But yeah, that's literally like Mortal Kombat, but with DC characters. So
yes, I remember Injustice. I used to have that, actually. That was one of the games I got back into because it was like Mortal Kombat with DC characters, and I could relate to that. My fingers worked on the controller for that.
Exactly. So I mean, my father, by the way, the same age as Sidi Iqbal. He used to play a lot of growing up. He used to play a lot of Need for Speed, and he literally got the what is that thing called? Like the steering wheel, but you connect it to the computer. He got that. Because he couldn't. I preferred the keyboard, and that's how I used to play. And some people, obviously, on the PlayStation, the controller, but he needed that thing. And he actually played more Need for Speed than myself. So he's the one who got me into Need for Speed. Otherwise, I never would have cared for that car game. It's literally not my style. But so there's that as well. If you're into that, I mean, it's just cars. So I guess may Allah make it easy for you to come back to gaming, if that's even something you said.
Yes, alhamdulillah. I mean, a lot of this I learned around 2011, 2012 time, that you need to have stuff in your life that isn't your work. Now, I mean, obviously, the deen stuff is about much bigger. It's about connecting with God and connecting with the deen and whatever. And so the analogy I suppose would be like going to Umrah. You don't go on Umrah as a holiday. You go on Umrah to do Umrah. You go on Hajj to do Hajj, the ibadah, right? And so learning the deen that's the way you should think about it, right? So I always take that out of the way. I don't put that as an interest. When people say, what are your interests? And I say, well, I'm interested in religion, but actually I don't really want to say that because that's not an interest. That's more of a goal of mine, if you know what I mean. But I did notice that you need to have stuff outside work. You need to have something that makes your life a little bit, just something, whether it's, and so I remember around 2011, 2012, started getting back into technology. I tried to get back into gaming, but as I said, it hasn't really happened. Got my guitar back out again, because you need to have something else in life, right? Apart from work.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's very easy to get burnt out. And I think now, especially as as the pressures on your time get more, the more and more you do have to work, the more and more time outside of work that is spent doing exams and postgraduate this and this experience, that and the other. You need some kind of outlet. And so over these last 10 years, alhamdulillah, I managed to come up with a couple of these outlets. So one of them was music to an extent. One of them is technology. Another one is fitness. I was never a particularly fit man. I used to be vastly overweight. Led to a couple of health problems, which were a bit of a wake-up call to me of, I need to start looking after myself. I'm not getting any younger, and genetically I'm in a bad place because I'm South Asian, so we're more likely to get diabetes, we're more likely to get high blood pressure, we're more likely to get heart disease. Our coronary arteries are smaller than the average, all of these kinds of stuff. So I can't mess around with my health. And so so I've started getting into a couple of those things as well. And I just find that it's important actually to have a functioning family life, believe it or not.
Yeah.
If I've had a really particularly stressful day at work, right? I don't know, critical case, conflict with different doctors or whatever it might be, I make sure that I go do something which requires some physical exercise. Go to the gym, go for a walk, go on the bike, whatever, something. Because otherwise, all of that pent up frustration and stress, which you can't let go at work, you end up letting go in front of your family. There's a particular nurse that I work with. Her name's Louise. She's probably not going to be watching this, so I can say it. And I've actually made up a thing called the Louise effect. She's lovely, but she's so difficult to work with. And I spend the whole day biting my tongue, taking deep breaths, kind of like, okay, Louise hasn't done this. Okay, fine. All right. Oh, Louise hasn't done that. Okay, fine. Or Louise has, and this, that, and the other. And, I just be calm, collected and whatever. And then I'll come home, and then, I don't know, one of the kids will drop the curry on the floor, and I'll be like, what the hell have you done? Can you believe it? And all of that just floods out. Do you know what I mean? And so I've learned that you need to have whatever it might be. As I say, it doesn't have to be necessarily physical fitness. It can be anything, but you need to have something to switch off from your work. As I said, you can use Deen for that in the sense of, but then that's kind of like, well, that's not your intention isn't particularly clear then, is it? Is your intention to make yourself feel better, or is it to get to God? Do you see what I mean?
Exactly.
So, something else, So I think that's part of the reasons why I keep it, I'm trying to keep up with all these technology and music and whatever things.
Absolutely. Makes a great distraction. I had one or two more questions for you, Doc, but I think the next one I'm going to ask you, we could literally do another whole episode on it, but you can decide how you want to tackle it. It's almost Maghrib time here for me, so I'd also be having to go for that. I was going to ask you, first of all, we just came out of a pandemic, and we saw a lot of misinformation, not even that, disinformation about not just vaccines, but masks, the virus itself,
the whole thing,
everything, basically. Okay, I saw your podcast with Mufti Abu Layth at the time, and you did speak about it then, and how some people were just being ridiculous, like, oh, we have to open the mosque, and like when people are literally dying, mate. But yeah, that was there. Going forward, how do we deal with this sort of misinformation, disinformation? Because some of it comes from a good place. I mean, you guys had freaking Boris Johnson as your PM at that time. I don't blame people for not trusting him and his government. I don't particularly trust Rishi Sunak and what he's going to do right now. And I'm sure your sentiments are the same. So I understand where it's coming from, but then to then go ahead and dismiss everything that comes out of the CDC or the NHS as just a conspiracy to repopulate the earth of something. I don't know what it even is, but yeah, how do we deal with that sort of thing going forward? Because we're still dealing with the effects of that even now.
So I think people need to have a bit of humility, right? You have to kind of stay in your lane a little bit, right? You need to have a healthy inquiry, but not a conspiratorial mindset. Sidi Rashad, I think you may have come across another one of Sidi's students.
Rashad Ali?
Yeah, Rashad Ali, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I know him.
He made a great statement once. We were chatting once about this, and he said, it's a free country. This is as best as I can remember it. It's a free country. Everybody has the right to their opinion, but not everybody has a right to their opinion being followed, right? And if people have a little bit of humility and take a step back, right, I think that it's not just about COVID. I mean, there's so much disinformation as it is, conspiracy theories and all sorts of the other. And, me, myself as well, I don't want to be a government shill. I don't want to just say that everything that the CDC or the NHS or Public Health England, whatever it says is the truth, because some of it isn't. For example, masks as an example. The utility of masks is marginal. I know that, right? But in the context of a pandemic, even that marginal gain is worth it. The thing about vaccines, I took the initial vaccines. Now that the virus has mutated, I don't see the need to take them because, well, the virus has mutated and these are for the earlier variants. So, as I said, I'm not being a government shill. I'm not trying to say that, everybody who's got any other kind of viewpoint is wrong. But I do feel that if people say religion is the last refuge of the scoundrel, then conspiracy theory is the last refuge of the idiot. Yeah, the one who doesn't understand what's happening in the world has to find some big conspiracy. Oh, the Great Reset. They're all trying to get rid of all of us and they're going to repopulate the world and this, that, and the other. And it's kind of like, well, if they are, they're not doing a very good job of it, are they? There's still 8 billion of us. It's not worked very well. Oh, if this was really a chemical weapon unleashed on purpose, well, it's still not very good. So I think people just need to have a bit of humility, I think, and be open. Yes, be questioning. But at the same time, it's actually the Sunnah. You follow the people if you don't. You ask the people of knowledge if you don't know, right? And that is true for both Deen and Dunya, right? So yes, we all know it in the case of the Deen. If we don't know something, we ask our scholars. But it's the same in when it comes to dunyavi matters. There's narration of the Prophet ﷺ that when someone came to him with a particular illness, he told him to go and see so and so physician. Why? Because that physician knew how to deal with that illness, right? So it's that. You see that it's that thing again of being appropriate, being sensible, having a bit of humility. Unfortunately, you can't teach these things. Yeah. And social media and the internet has amplified all the idiots in the world. And so it's an exercise in patience for the rest of us.
Definitely. I think, that's a great answer. We'll definitely take it into stride. Dr. Majid, now to wind up, do you have any questions or series of questions for myself, since I've been grilling you trying to for the last, I don't know how long, but yeah, it's your turn.
Well,
now.
Actually, I do have lots of questions for you, actually, but I think the best way to actually deal with it would be I'd get you on my podcast.
Okay, well,
I'll get you on an Atypical Anaesthetist podcast, because it could well be, there's a lot of things that have come up to my mind actually over this last hour or two. But
really,
if we keep talking, it'll probably, you'll probably miss Maghrib tomorrow if we keep talking.
Yeah, it looks like it. No, I'd definitely be open to that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
inshallah, I will. I will do that. I'll get you on the Atypical Anaesthetist.
Okay, that's great. That's great.
And my African friends.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm one of them now. So there's
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Okay. So Dr. Majid, then where can my audience find you? Put in everything you want, your Instagram, your
Okay.
podcast, everything.
Okay, fine. So where can they find me? They can find me on Twitter. Yes, I'm still on Twitter, although I probably won't be for much longer. At Atypical Doctor. I'm on Instagram as Atypical Anaesthetist. My podcast is Atypical Anaesthetist on Spotify. For my technology stuff, I'm on mintcast.org. And you can email me on drmajid@mintcast.org. Or if you just want to do the usual kind of thing, just hit me up on Facebook, Majid Shaikh.
Yeah.
Not many of us.
Yeah, Dr. Majid still has a Facebook, like myself. I literally talk to friends who are like 7 years younger than me, and they're like, no, we're not getting on Facebook. So
Oh yeah, my kids are on Facebook because that's for Buddha. It's for old people.
yeah, it's become like, I remember when I first got on Facebook, and Doc, do you remember Facebook used to have an age restriction? I'm not making that up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it did. Yeah, 13,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, it was 13. I joined a few days after my 13th birthday. And
Oh, okay.
I just managed to get in like that. So I remember it was such a great thing because all my cousins and them had it. I'm like, finally, I can be with them. But yeah, now it's a boomer thing now. So
Yeah. I mean, I want to get. I would love to get off it. The only thing is that I don't trust Zuckerberg to get rid of my data.
well, yeah.
So so at least if I'm still on it, at least I can control some of my data. If I come off it, he'll probably just take it all and use it to make more money for cage fights with Elon.
Yeah. Well, there's that. Well, Elon's Twitter, it's not even going to, apparently he's going to change the name to X. Like it's really just going to be called X.
You know what? In the future, there will be university courses and PhD programs on how to destroy a successful social media company. And the case study will be Elon Musk and Twitter. He has have you heard the phrase Schadenfreude?
Yes.
German phrase Schadenfreude.
I was on Mufti's thing. Yeah, I was on Mufti's book club. We read a book called Schadenfreude.
Yeah. So I'm getting a lot of Schadenfreude with Elon Musk and Twitter. I'm loving it because Twitter really is a cesspool of, that thing I'm talking about, humility and this, that, and the other. None of that exists on Twitter. It's full of the worst of humanity. And frankly, if Elon does destroy it, it'll probably be a service to humanity.
Yeah. Well, mashallah. And on that note of instigating Elon Musk to do a good service to humanity, we will end this podcast. Inshallah, look out for the Atypical Anaesthetist when he interviews Mustaqim Habib all the way from Gaborone, Botswana. But until then, to the listeners and the viewers, thank you for holding out for this long. It's always interesting to find someone who's like-minded like Dr. Majid and get him on and talk about these things. And we really enjoyed it. We hope you did and you learned something as well. Until next time, and to Dr. Majid, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much for seeing this through to the end. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Give us a 5-star rating if you're using an audio platform. All of these things drive up the algorithm, as well as commenting, so let us know how it was for you. A special shout out once again to our sponsors, Alpha House of Fashion, Baseline Media Intellects, and Batch by Zahra. The Ko-fi and Patreon links for donations are live and down below. Remember to donate only if you have the means to do so. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum, peace.